Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. How's everyone today? Alhamdulillah. نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أما بعد فأعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وربي زدني علما اللهم فقهنا في الدين اللهم إني أسألك علما نافعا وعملا متقبلا ورزقا طيبا اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. Ameen. All right, so before we move on to the next lesson, that is the last lesson of Surah al-Kahf, let's go back to lesson number 154. Surah al-Kahf verses 83 to 98. In these verses, we learn about Dhul Qarnayn. And through his mention, we are reminded of the fact that people in this dunya are tested through authority, through power. Many people with authority and with power make bad choices, they spread corruption, but not everyone. Okay? Dhul Qarnayn was blessed with many, many resources that he used in ways that were pleasing to Allah. And so this is an example of someone with Iman being granted tawfiq to perform ahsan amal. And he was a man of many resources. And his mention, his story, is found here towards the end of Surah al-Kahf. This is the fourth story included within this surah. But for a moment, think about the first story. The first story mentioned in Surah al-Kahf is about Ashabul Kahf. And their mention reminds us of the fact that with faith also come many tests. With Iman also, many tests come. Some people fail the tests, but not everyone. Many pass the tests that come with Iman, like Ashabul Kahf. When it comes to the first story, the story of Ashabul Kahf, these believing men, young men, didn't have too many resources. They didn't have authority, which is why they had to retreat to the cave to protect their faith. This was their passing the test that came their way in this dunya. Their retreating into the cave with limited resources was ahsan amal in their case. And when it comes to the story of Dhul Qarnayn, this was a believing man with many, many, many resources, many asbab, right? And his using those means and going from one side, of the world to the other side and remaining just and not spreading corruption, in fact, doing the opposite, bringing betterment to people, that in his case was ahsan amal. That was him passing his test. And in between these two stories, we find two more stories, right? Which stories? The men, right? The two men, and then one of them having two gardens, right? And the third story, Musa alayhi salam and Khadir. So in the case of the two men, one with the two gardens and the other one who was the companion, these were people who you could say were pretty much the same in terms of their status, or they were equivalent almost, right? Of course, one being more powerful and more wealthy than the other one, but they were pretty much of the same type. And when it comes to Musa alayhi salam and Khadir, clearly Musa alayhi salam, being a prophet, was of a higher rank. And in his story, we find that with knowledge, tests also come. Musa alayhi salam passed the test that came his way through adopting humility, going to acquire knowledge from the one who had more knowledge than him, even though he was the prophet of the time. That was his passing his test, right? And in the case of the man with the two gardens and his companion, the man with the two gardens, was wealthy. He had some amount of authority, but he didn't really put what he had to use in a way that was pleasing to Allah. On the other hand, the companion who was a believing person, who reminded his rich companion of the hereafter, in that situation of his, meaning him reminding his companion of what his companion was forgetting, was his passing his test. He was tested through somebody with more wealth than him. He passed the test. Musa alayhi salam was tested through somebody having more knowledge than him. He passed the test. Everyone's tests are different. But people have within them the capacity to perform what? Ahsan amal. So tests come through faith, tests come through wealth, tests come through knowledge, tests come through authority. We need to ask ourselves, in terms of whichever way it is that we're being tested, are we passing the tests? Are we focusing on ahsan amal? Now also here in this story of Dhul Qarnayn, towards the end there is mention of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. Also keep in mind that Dhul Qarnayn, although he was a man of much authority, many means, very resourceful, he didn't decide to fight against the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, although he could have. He didn't do that. So even people with authority and power have to do what? Be wise, right? Pick their battles wisely. In fact, when the Ya'juj and Ma'juj will be able to make their way through this barrier that has been erected, and when they are sort of unleashed and they go around spreading corruption everywhere, even then the believers of that time are not going to try to fight against them. They're going to actually retreat. They're going to hide from them. So from this we learn that when it comes to a lot of corruption, when it comes to a lot of fasad, sometimes you have to move yourself away. That's passing the test. You don't have to confront every situation that you come across head on. Okay? And only people of true faith, true iman, are able to decipher between, the two types of situations. Where is it that you should actually go out and, come into combat? And when should you actually retreat? Your faith, your iman equips you, right? In terms of handling situations with tact and with wisdom. Again, in the case of Dhul Qarnayn, in some situations he did, conquer certain lands, and he even declared that he would punish people who would be involved in wrongdoing. So in certain cases he adopted that strategy, but in other cases he didn't. In the case of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, he didn't. Right? Also keep in mind that, the methodology that you adopt in terms of handling any test in life is closely linked to your niyyah, your intention. Your intention in anything that you do, and in fact anything that you decide not to do also, should be what? Attaining Allah's approval. Attaining Allah's approval. Which is why we need to frequently turn back to Allah, asking Him for guidance. Which is why we repeat this supplication multiple times. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. So, in terms of handling any kind of test that comes your way in life, whether it is through faith or it is through wealth or it is through knowledge or authority, turn towards Allah for guidance. You cannot pass the test without His guidance. You cannot pass these tests with just lots and lots of knowledge, just lots and lots of wealth, lots and lots of authority. You need Allah's help. Your knowledge even has to be guided by Allah in order for you to be successful. Now, in verse number 97, in the context of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, it is mentioned, فَمَا اسْطَاعُوا أَن يَظْهَرُوهُ وَمَا اسْتَطَاعُوا لَهُ نَقَبًا. So the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they were unable to pass over it, meaning the radam that Dhul Qarnayn created or he constructed. They were unable to pass over it, nor were they able to effect in it, meaning into the wall, any penetration. And the terms ista'u and istata'u, they basically give the same meaning. Okay, but there is a subtle difference between the two. Okay, when it comes to the term ista'u, this is khafif, light. And istata'u with the additional ta, the additional ta, meaning additional letters in the formation of this term, indicates also what? Additional effort. The increase in terms of letters indicates what? Increase in terms of the effort. So istata'u is more shadid as opposed to just ista'u. So Ya'juj and Ma'juj were unable to pass over it, meaning the wall, nor were they able to effect in it, meaning the wall, any penetration. What's harder? Just climbing over a wall or putting a hole in it? Putting a hole in it, especially this kind of a wall, is harder. Okay, so hence you find in the term istata'u more severity in terms of meaning than just the term ista'u. They were unable to pass over it, nor were they able to effect in it any penetration. Also, you will notice in Surah al-Kahf, in many, many verses, some form of this word istata'u being found. Okay, even in the story of Musa alayhi salam and Khadr, you will find this word being repeated. So it's found here in verse 97, also found in verse 78, 77, 75, 72, 67, and then you will find also in verse 101 the same word being used in slightly different forms. Also in the case of Dhul Qarnayn, a man with iman, a man with many resources, much power. Notice how his favorable mention is preserved in the Qur'an. On account of what? What it is that he was able to do in this dunya. The athar, the traces that he left behind. Similarly, in the case of Ashabul Kahf, their favorable mention also has been preserved in the Qur'an. But again, keep in mind the difference between the two. Ashabul Kahf, in terms of resources, didn't have many resources. Still, their favorable mention is preserved where? In the Qur'an. And Dhul Qarnayn had many resources. And he was able to do a lot. His favorable mention is also preserved in the Qur'an. And you find mention of both groups. You find mention of Dhul Qarnayn and his supporters, his armies. And you find mention of Ashabul Kahf in the same surah. So we need to ask ourselves, in terms of the faith that we claim that we have, are our actions aligned? Are we aware of the resources that we have at our disposal? And are we focusing on bringing more betterment into our amal? Is our focus on ahsan amal, or just only amal, or akthar amal? What is the focus on? Do we really try hard to bring more betterment, more refinement in our deeds, meaning when it comes to intentions, performing deeds primarily to please Allah? Or are we just focusing on doing lots? Just focusing on the quantity? Or just doing without thinking? And many of us, when we analyze our lives, we're tested with regards to Iman and also wealth and knowledge and authority simultaneously, all at the same time. The only way to pass these tests is through asking Allah for guidance and purifying the intention. Okay, let's turn towards the next lesson. Lesson number 155, Surah al-Kahf, verses 99 to 110. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وتركنا بعضهم يومئذ يموج في بعض ونفخ في الصور فجمعناهم جمعا. And when they will come out, meaning Ya'juj and Ma'juj, we will leave them that day surging over each other. And then the horn will be blown, and we will assemble them in one assembly. وَتَرَكْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَمُوجُ فِي بَعْضٍ. And we will leave them that day, meaning on the day of resurrection, surging over each other. We will leave them meaning Ya'juj and Ma'juj, or all people on the day of judgment. The term tarakna from ta-ra kaf, taraka means to leave. So we will leave them again, Ya'juj and Ma'juj, or all people, an-nas, people in general. And this is, of course, connected to what is mentioned in the previous verse. What is mentioned in verse number 98. That Dhul Qarnayn, he said, this is a mercy from my Lord, meaning the ability to construct this radam, all of these asbab. This is a mercy from my Lord. فَإِذَا جَاءَ وَعْدُ رَبِّي جَعَلَهُ دَكَّا. But when the promise of my Lord comes, he will make it level. And ever is the promise of my Lord true. So, wa'ad here, in verse number 98, is understood two ways, right? One is that it is referring to the coming out of Ya'juj and Ma'juj. They're being able to cross the radam. And wa'ad here can also be referring to the day of judgment. So connecting verse 98 to verse 99, وَتَرَكْنَا بَعْضَهُمْ يَوْمَئِذٍ يَمُوجُ فِي بَعْضٍ. And we will leave them that day, meaning on the day of judgment. We will leave them, meaning all people in general. If وَعْدُ رَبِّي in the previous verse is referring to the day of judgment. Or this can mean, and we will leave them, meaning the Ya'juj and Ma'juj, if wa'ad in the previous verse is referring to what? The coming out of the Ya'juj and Ma'juj. We will leave them that day surging over each other. Yamudu fi ba'd. And the term yamudu from mawj, mim waw jim, mawj. And the term mawj is used for a wave or a surge. And maja yamudu means to swell or to be agitated or to be troubled. We will leave them that day surging over each other, meaning they will mix with one another on account of their multitude, colliding with one another, or they will emerge upon the people to destroy their wealth and property, creating fasad. Like a wave of water sweeps across whatever comes in its path. وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ. And then the horn will be blown. So, meaning soon after the first blowing of the trumpet, another blowing will occur for the ba'ath, for the resurrection. So this is referring to the second blowing. And also this indicates soon after the coming of the Ya'juj and the Ma'juj, the day of judgment will occur. فَجَمَعْنَاهُمْ جَمْعًا, and we will assemble them in one place for the purpose of hisab and jaza in one assembly. We shall bring them all together for reckoning. جَمْعًا عَظِيمًا. And this assembly will include human beings and jinn and malaika, even animals. In Surah Al-Fajr, we learn in verse 22, وَجَاءَ رَبُّكَ وَالْمَلَكُ صَفًّا صَفًّا. And your Lord has come and the angels rank upon rank. In Surah Al-An'am, verse 38, we learn, and there is no creature on or within the earth or bird that flies with its wings except that they are communities like you. We have not neglected in the register a thing. ثُمَّ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِمْ يُحْشَرُونَ. Then unto their Lord they will be gathered. وَعَرَضْنَا جَهَنَّمَ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَرْضًا. And we will present hell that day, meaning on the day of judgment, to the disbelievers for them to see face to face on display. And this wow in the beginning of this verse is harf atf. It is connected to the previous verse. So people will be surging into one another, and on the same day, the hellfire will be presented. The term aradna from ayn ra dad, arada means to happen or to take place, to become visible. And the term arada, when it comes with li, like it does here, وَعَرَضْنَا جَهَنَّمَ يَوْمَئِذٍ لِلْكَافِرِينَ عَرْضًا, it means to present or demonstrate or to bring something in front of someone, to exhibit, to show, to display. And we will present hell, Jahannam, with 70,000 leashes or reins or bridles, similar to the bridles that are used for horses to control them. We will present hell that day, on the day of judgment, lil kafirin, to the disbelievers, arda, on display. So again, arada li, it means to put on display, to exhibit, so that what is exhibited, what is presented, is clearly seen. It's clearly visible. And the term arda as a masdar being used here for added emphasis, to show the enormity of the display. So this indicates that this displaying will be a great displaying. Ardan aziman, a great display, clear and horrific. So Allah will bring the hellfire forth for the people, the disbelievers, to see its punishment and torment before they are made to enter into it, which will only do what? Add to their grief and distress. We learn that Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, he reports, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, Jahannam will be brought on that day, meaning the day of judgment, with 70,000 bridles and 70,000 angels dragging each bridle. 70,000 reins and 70,000 angels dragging each rein. Which kinds of animals in this dunya do we use bridles and reins for? The ones that are hard to contain. The hellfire, Jahannam, will be raging and roaring. It will be brought forth for display, exhibited, chained. Why is this being mentioned? The objective of informing us about this is so that we rectify our affairs. Which affairs? Which affairs do you think we need to rectify most of all? Yes, our relationship with our Creator. Because that ends up being that one affair that we neglect the most. So this description is included here towards the end of Surah Al-Kahf, After we've been reminded of so many different types of tests that come towards people in this dunya. And we haven't only been told about the tests that will come, we've also been told about how those tests can be passed. How we can still focus on ahsan amal in this dunya, which is temporary, in preparation for the Day of Judgment. This description comes here so that we're reminded of this reality, the ending of this dunya, and our returning to our Creator, and our being held accountable before Him on the Day of Judgment. And so we're being reminded of the importance of rectifying all of our affairs. Number one, our affair with our Creator, our meeting with Him. We must prepare for this meeting. This is not a meeting that you want to show up for unprepared. Because in the dunya, when you do know of an important meeting that you're going to have with somebody, you can sometimes wing it and go unprepared. And then you're like, okay, didn't work out this time, next time I'll be better prepared. This meeting with Allah is a very significant meeting. And think about it. It is just this soul that is within us right now that has to leave at the command of Allah. And then, once that happens, there is nothing before us except for this Day of Judgment. Think about that. Let that sink in. That's all, really. Once that soul that is within us right now departs, then what is there after that? When a person dies, what happens after that? Quickly, one after the other. What steps are taken? The person is, prepared for burial. The burial takes place. And then there is that state of barzakh that begins for that person. And then that person remains there without any option to exit that stage. Until what? The Day of Judgment. And then once that Day of Judgment begins, then what's going to happen? This Jahannam that has been described here this way will be presented. For whom? The kafirin. And then there's no escaping it for them. They're going to be made to enter into it, but before they're made to enter into it, they're going to be shown the hellfire, which will only add to their grief. And who are these kafirin? الَّذِينَ كَانَتْ أَعْيُنُهُمْ فِي غِطَاءٍ عَنْ ذِكْرِي. Those whose eyes had been within a cover, removed from my remembrance. وَكَانُوا لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ سَمْعًا. And they were not able to hear. The term أعين, plural of عين. The term غطاء, from غين طاء واو or غين طاء hamza. The term غطاء is used for a clothing or a covering, a wrapping that envelops. It can even be used for a type of lid that is placed on something, or a thick veil through which nothing can be seen. And here, the term غطاء is used for heedlessness. Those whose eyes had been within a cover, unable to obtain guidance, in complete ghafla. Those whose eyes had been within a cover, removed from my remembrance. And here, dhikri, my remembrance, referring to the Qur'an. وَكَانُوا لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ سَمْعًا. And they were not able to hear. The term sam'a, from sin mim ayn, sam' means to hear. And of course, there is sam' of idrak, which is to perceive of sounds. But then there is also sam' of ijabah or qubul, which is accepting. So they might have been able to process some sounds through sam' of idrak, but they had made up their minds to not accept. There was no sam'a, ijaba or qabul. So there's no change. And again, the term يستطيعون from ta wa ayn. Istita'a, it means to have the ability. As we learn in Surah al-Kahf, verse 67 also, إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. Khadir, he said to Musa alayhi salam, indeed with me you will never be able to have patience. And also the term يستطيع, it's used in the meaning of intention. In Surah Al-Ma'idah, we learn in verse 112, and remember when the disciples said, O Isa, son of Maryam, هل يستطيع ربك أن ينزل علينا مائدة من السماء? Can your Lord send down to us a table spread with food from the heaven? So here in this verse where it is mentioned, those whose eyes had been within a cover removed from my remembrance and they were not able to hear. Meaning they never intended to listen. This means, number one, they never even intended to listen. Which kind of listening? Of sam'a, qabul or ijaba. They never even intended to listen to accept. Or this means they were unable to listen to what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited because of their hatred and their bias. Their hatred or their bias was like a blockage. And so they were unable to listen to what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam recited. And this is very serious. Listening is actually one of the easiest things to do. Much easier than speaking and looking even. Because in order to speak, you have to open your mouth. In order to look, you have to open your eyes. But your ears are open, unless you choose to block them. Right? So a person refraining from listening is what? An indication that a person actually has no interest in what is being said. A person may even be processing certain sounds, but is not actually accepting those sounds, not internalizing them because of some blockage, inner blockage, some bias. So these kafirin, they may have had the opportunity to hear the Qur'an being recited, but they were not really listening to the message. And this is why not listening to someone, when someone is speaking to you, not listening to them is very insulting. When somebody is speaking to you and you actually choose to indicate to them that you're not listening, it's very insulting. Because in a way you're saying to them, I dislike you or what you're saying so much that I'm not even going to pay attention, even though that's the easiest thing for me to do. Think about it. Why do you at times hesitate to tell someone about the truth of Islam or about the Day of Judgment? You know about it, right? You have knowledge to share. Why would you hesitate in telling certain people about this? Because of what? Fear of being rejected. Fear that, the people that you're going to be trying to communicate this message to won't listen. Although listening is so easy. So just like when you speak, it gives other people a glimpse of what is inside you. And also then, what you choose to listen to and process indicates what? What you're genuinely interested in. So what is your taste when it comes to watching things? What is your taste when it comes to listening to certain things? How do you listen when people sit around you and they indulge in backbiting? What is your listening like? How do you listen when you're being advised by a well-wisher of what you should do and what you shouldn't do? How do you listen when your mistakes are pointed out to you? Many people act as if they're deaf when their mistakes are pointed out to them. They have real mistakes, but when well-wishers bring those mistakes to their attention, they have all kinds of justifications, all kinds of explanations. They don't let that information penetrate because they're in denial, right? They have an opportunity to listen and improve themselves, but they deprive themselves. In Surah Al-Hajj, we learn in verse number 46, فَإِنَّهَا لَا تَعْمَى الْأَبْصَارِ وَلَكِنْ تَعْمَى الْقُلُوبِ الَّتِي فِي الصُّدُورِ. For indeed it is not eyes that are blinded, but blinded are the hearts which are within the breasts. In Surah Al-Isra, verse 45, we learn, وَإِذَا قَرَأْتَ الْقُرْآنَ جَعَلْنَا بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ حِجَابًا مَسْتُورًا. And when you recite the Qur'an, we put between you and those who do not believe in the hereafter a concealed partition. In Surah Fussilat, we learn in verse 5, وَقَالُوا قُلُوبُنَا فِي أَكِنَّةٍ. And they say, our hearts are within coverings from that to which you invite us, and in our ears is deafness, and between us and you is a partition. Therefore, the one who doesn't want to listen to the truth, then what should be his outcome? Except that punishment is brought before him face to face. Okay, let's listen to the recitation of these first few verses.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وتركنا بعضهم يومئذ يموج في بعض ونفخ في الصور فجمعناهم جمعا وعرضنا جهنم يومئذ للكافرين عرضا الذين كانت أعينهم في غطاء عن ذكري وكانوا لا يستطيعون سمعا
أفحسب الذين كفروا أن يتخذوا عبادي من دوني أولياء. Then do those who disbelieve think that they can take my servants instead of me as allies? إِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا جَهَنَّمَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ نُزُولًا. Indeed, we have prepared hell for the disbelievers as a lodging. And this istifham is for tawbih, for rebuke. أَفَحَسِبَ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا. Then do those who disbelieve think أَن يَتَّخِذُوا عِبَادِي مِن دُونِي أَوْلِيَاءَ, that they can take my servants instead of me as allies. Awliya, plural of wali. Wali is a close protecting friend. And the term يَتَّخِذُوا from Hamza Kha Dal. Ittikhad is to firmly adopt something. Then do those who disbelieve think that they can take my servants instead of me as allies? And then there will be no resulting ghadab that reaches them? And this will be all fine? The term ibad, plural of abd. And here, ibad is referring to righteous slaves, worshippers of Allah. This also includes angels. This also includes prophets like Isa alayhi salam and Uzair alayhi salam. This includes jinn also and other creation like the sun, the moon, trees, rocks. Then do those who disbelieve think that they can take my servants, including prophets and righteous worshippers like Khadir? Some people admire him so much that they pray to him for help. Some people elevate the rank of Isa alayhi salam way too much, considering him to be divine. Some people worship angels. Some people fear jinn the way that they should fear Allah. Some people, of course, worship the sun, the moon, the trees, rocks. Then do those who disbelieve think that they can take my servants instead of me as allies and invoke them, seek help from them, fear them, and forget about the wilayah of Allah? In Surah Maryam, verse 93, we learn, In kullu man fis samawati wal ardi illa ati rahmani abada. There is no one in the heavens and earth but that he comes to the most merciful as a servant. Inna a'tadana jahannama lil kafirina nuzula. Indeed, we have prepared hell for the disbelievers as a lodging. A'tadana from ain ta dal. Atuda means to be ready or prepared, and a'tada means to get ready, to keep something ready. We have prepared hell for the disbelievers as a lodging. Nuzula from nun zai lam. The masdar nuzul means to descend from a height, and nazala yanzilu means to descend. And nuzul is that which is prepared for the guest before he arrives. Meaning, what food the guest is going to consume, where the guest will sleep, what activities he's going to be involved in. It's basically what has been prepared for the guest beforehand. So this is where the kafirin will arrive after their entire journey of life in this dunya, and also the state of barzakh, the day of judgment. This is what they're going to find. They're going to consume zaqqum and muhl. And when it comes to their pastime, it'll be the angels rebuking them, and other inmates of the hellfire arguing with them and cursing them. At the end of such a long journey, this is what they're going to receive. And again, who is this for? The kafirin. Those who are averse towards the truth, even though they have faculties with which they can recognize the truth. Guidance has been arranged for them. But still, because of that inner obstacle that is within them, the stubbornness, they go on rejecting the truth. So this terrible outcome is for those whose actions in this worldly life were terrible. May Allah protect us all from this outcome. Ameen. All right, inshallah, we will end here for now. When we resume in the afternoon, we will continue from verse number 103 onwards, inshallah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله الله أكبر